I learned to predict storms the winter my husband died. 3 years teaches you things. 3 winters alone teaches you more. The sky on Christmas Eve, 1885, had that particular color, not quite gray, not quite white. But something between that meant trouble. The air smelled different, too. Sharp and metallic. Like the world was holding its breath. Even the birds had gone quiet hours ago, tucked into whatever shelter they could find. I stood at my cabin window watching the first flakes begin to fall and thought about all the ways I'd learned to read the land since Jacob's death. I knew this cabin better than I'd known my husband by the end, if I'm being honest. Every crack in the floorboards, every shadow the lamp cast, every sound the wind made against the shutters. What does that say about me, I used to wonder. Now I just accepted it as truth. The fire needed tending. I moved away from the window and knelt by the hearth. Added 2 logs the way I'd learned one across. One angled, efficient. No waste. Everything I did those days was efficient. Had to be when you were alone. The stew I'd made that morning still simmered in the pot. I'd cooked enough for 3 days. Another habit born of practicality. Easier to make a lot at once than fuss with small portions. That's what I told myself anyway. Didn't examine too closely why I always made enough to feed people who weren't there. I set 1 plate on my table, 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 cup. The second chair sat in the corner where I'd moved it 2 years back. Some habits you keep because they mean something. Some because you've forgotten how to stop. My hands worked while my mind drifted, stirring the stew. Slicing bread, pouring water. I'd memorized these movements until they required no thought. That was the trick to surviving alone. Keep your hands busy enough that your mind had nowhere dangerous to wander. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow was falling harder now, the flakes visible in the lamplight from my window. I checked my preparations 1 more time, extra wood stacked by the door. Shutters secured, pantry stocked. The shutter on the east window still banged loose sometimes. Had been doing it for months, but I'd learned to ignore it. Just another sound in the symphony of solitude. I pulled my shawl tighter and settled into the rocking chair with my knitting. The needles clicked in rhythm with the wind. Outside, the world was turning white. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. Exactly as it had been for 3 years. I'd gotten good at being alone. Too good. Maybe. But good nonetheless. The candle I lit cast familiar shadows. 1 candle, not 2. 1 woman, not a pair. I used to count things differently in halves and partners, in conversations and shared glances. Now I counted in solitudes. This many hours until morning. This many logs to last the storm. This many stitches before the row was done. When did I stop missing voices? The question flickered through my mind unbidden. When did silence become preference instead of punishment? I didn't have an answer. Couldn't pinpoint the day I stopped listening for footsteps that would never come. The wind howled louder. I told myself I was content. Told myself every day. Repetition makes things true. Or at least makes them familiar enough to bear. Another Christmas. Another storm. Another night of proving I could manage. Then I heard it faint. Distant. Almost lost in the wind. Crying. Or maybe not. Probably just the storm playing tricks. Wind through the eaves could sound like anything if you let your imagination run. I kept knitting. Counted stitches. Ignored it. It came again. Definitely crying. Definitely human. Definitely a child. I set down my knitting with hands that had started to shake. At first I thought it was the storm playing tricks. But no storm ever sounded that human. That small. That terrified. I stood frozen. Needles still in my lap. Listening. The wind screamed. Then through it, thin. Desperate. Afraid. A child crying somewhere in the darkness outside my door. My mind raced through explanations. Couldn't be real. No child would be out in this weather. No parent would allow it. But the sound came again. Closer now. And something in my chest cracked open before I could stop it. Damn my conscience. Damn my heart that never learned to mind its own business. I grabbed my heavy shawl and moved to the door. The wind fought me when I pulled it open, nearly tearing it from my hands. Snow drove into my face, blinding. The cold hit like a physical blow. I squinted into the white darkness, trying to locate the source of the crying. "Hello." My voice barely carried. "Where are you?" The crying stuttered, went quiet. Then, "Help." So small, I almost missed it. I followed the sound, one hand on the porch rail, then the fence. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling faster. My shawl whipped around me. Cold burned my lungs with each breath. Part of me, the sensible part that had kept me alive 3 winters, screamed to go back inside. But I'd heard that voice, that terrified child voice, and I couldn't unknow it. I found him collapsed against my fence post, barely visible in the snow. Small. So impossibly small. His clothes were soaked through. His lips had gone blue. His eyes, when they found mine, held the kind of terror that stops your heart. No thought now. Pure instinct. I scooped him up lighter than he should be, cold as stone, and fought my way back to the cabin. He didn't cry anymore, just shook against me in terrible silence. The weight of him in my arms solid, real. Trusting was the first thing I'd held in 3 years that held me back. Inside, I kicked the door shut and carried him straight to the fire. My hands knew what to do, even as my mind raced. Strip the wet clothes, wrap him in quilts. Get him warm. Get him warm now. You're safe, I heard myself saying. You're safe now. I heated water, added honey, held the cup to his blue lips. Drink. Small sips. He obeyed, shaking so hard the water sloshed. I wrapped another quilt around his shoulders and rubbed his small hands between mine, trying to bring feeling back. His fingers were like ice. How long had he been out there? "What's your name?" I kept my voice gentle. Thomas? His teeth chattered. "Thomas. Good. I'm Martha. You're in my cabin now. You're safe." I repeated it like a prayer. Maybe it was one, "Can you tell me what happened? Got lost?" Papa was looking, but I ran the wrong way. Tears started down his cheeks. "Is Papa okay?" My heart dropped. A father out in this storm, searching, frantic. I couldn't think about that now. Had to focus on the child in front of me. "I'm sure your Papa is looking for you. He'll find his way to shelter." I tried to sound confident. "Right now, we need to get you warm. Can you drink more?" He nodded. Drank. Color was starting to return to his face, though he still shook. I described everything I was doing, kept talking to keep him calm, to keep myself from panicking. 5 years old. Maybe. Someone's whole world. I wanted them gone already. Wanted my quiet back. Wanted not to feel this thing waking up inside me that felt dangerously like need, then pounding on my door. Loud, desperate, frantic, I opened it to a force of nature. The man nearly fell through my doorway, snow-covered, wild-eyed, looking like he'd been searching for hours. His face was raw from the cold and wind. His eyes swept my cabin with barely controlled terror until they landed on the small bundle by my fire. "Thomas." The word wasn't a greeting. It was a sob, a prayer, a breaking open of everything held too tight too long. He crossed my floor in 3 strides and fell to his knees beside his son. His hands shaking as badly as the boy's touched Thomas's face, like he couldn't quite believe he was real. Thomas threw his small arms around his father's neck. "Papa, I'm sorry. Papa, shh, shh. It's okay. You're okay." The man, David, I would learn, pressed his face into his son's hair and wept. I backed away slowly, uncertain where to stand, where to look. This raw emotion filling my parlor felt like an invasion, like something too intimate for strangers to witness. I moved to the stove, busied myself with heating more water, gave them space for their reunion. This was supposed to be my night alone, my safe, predictable, manageable night alone. Instead, my cabin was full of strangers and feelings I had no use for. David finally pulled back, checked his son over with careful hands. "You're really okay. Miss Martha saved me," Thomas said. "She found me and brought me inside and gave me warm honey water and quilts, and thank you." David's eyes found mine. They were red-rimmed, exhausted, full of something I couldn't quite name. "Thank you. I've been searching since he went missing this afternoon," I thought. His voice broke. "Thank you." I nodded, not trusting my own voice. Turned back to the stove before he could see whatever was showing on my face. David tried to leave within the hour. Started bundling Thomas back into his barely dry clothes, thanking me over and over, promising he wouldn't impose any longer. I looked at the windows. The storm had gotten worse. Not better. Snow drove sideways in sheets. The wind sounded like wolves howling. "You can't go out in that." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "We've already been too much trouble. You'll freeze to death before you make it 100 yards. I crossed my arms. "Both of you. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you." I met his eyes. "I didn't fish your son out of a snowbank just to watch you both freeze. You'll stay until morning at least." The man was an idiot. A grateful, determined, probably going to freeze to death idiot. Men, always so worried about being a burden they'd kill themselves, proving they're not. "I really don't want to impose, Mr." I realized I didn't know his last name. "Harrison, David Harrison." "Mr. Harrison, it's Christmas Eve and there's a blizzard. You have a sick child who nearly froze to death. Imposing would be making me worry all night about whether you made it home safely. Staying would be doing me a kindness." Something in my logic, or maybe just my tone, made him relent. His shoulders sagged. "You're very kind. I'm very practical. There's a difference." I moved past him toward the back of the cabin. "Come on. I'll show you where you can sleep." The spare room sat behind the kitchen. Jacob's old room, though I never called it that aloud. I'd kept the door closed for 2 years. Opening it now felt like opening a wound, but I forced my hand steady on the latch. The room was cold, unused. I lit the lamp and saw everything exactly as I'd left it. Bed made with military precision. Dresser bare. Window shuttered. No dust, because I still cleaned it every week. Couldn't seem to stop. It's not much, but it's warm, or will be once the fire heats through the wall. I pulled extra blankets from the chest. "I'll get you some quilts. This is more than enough. Really." David stood in the doorway, Thomas already half asleep against his shoulder. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks. Just stay put until the storm clears." I left them to settle in and returned to my kitchen. My hands shook slightly as I started preparing supper. Not from cold. From something else I didn't want to examine. David appeared in the doorway. "Can I help? No need. Please." I'd feel better doing something. I wanted to refuse. Wanted my space back, my kitchen to myself. my careful routines uninterrupted. But he looked so lost standing there, and I was too tired to argue. Fine, you can slice the bread. Knife's in that drawer. We worked in awkward silence. I stirred the stew. He cut bread with precise, even slices. Our movements created a strange dance passing the butter crock, reaching for plates. Careful not to brush against each other in the small space, I noticed his hands. Weathered, capable, scarred across the knuckles. Working hands, like mine, like Jacob's had been. I set 3 plates on my table. 3. The number felt strange, wrong and right at once. 2 extra chairs pulled up from the corner. Thomas settled into one. Yawning, David took the other. I sat in my usual place and felt the world tilt slightly. "Smells wonderful," David said quietly. "It's just stew." Still, he spooned some onto Thomas's plate, then his own. Waited until I'd served myself before eating. Old-fashioned manners that reminded me of my father. Thomas ate with a child's focus. Too hungry and tired for conversation, David and I maintained careful silence, punctuated only by the scrape of spoons against bowls and the howl of wind outside. The cabin felt smaller with the minute. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to taking up less space than I was entitled to. 3 people around one table. Voices, breathing, presence. The sounds I'd forgotten could fill a home. After supper, Thomas could barely keep his eyes open. David carried him to their room. I heard low voices, a father settling his son for sleep. Then footsteps returning. "He's out." David leaned against the kitchen doorframe. "Today exhausted him. Nearly dying will do that. Thanks to you. He didn't..." His voice went rough. "I don't know what I would have done if..." "Don't..." I cut him off, unable to hear that thought completed. "He's fine. That's what matters. Still, I owe you. You don't owe me anything." I turned away, started washing dishes. "Anyone would have done the same." "Maybe, but you're the one who did." I didn't answer. Kept washing, drying, putting away. He watched for a moment, then quietly left me to it. Later, lying in my bed, I listened to unfamiliar sounds. David moving in the next room. The creak of floorboards under different weight. Thomas's soft breathing through the thin walls. The small noises of other people existing in my space. I should have felt invaded. My careful solitude disrupted, my safe routines shattered. Instead, I lay there wondering when my home had started feeling like a tomb, and why it took strangers to make me. Notice, I told myself it was just one night, one storm. Come morning, they'd be gone, and everything would go back to the way it was. I was good at lying to myself by then. I woke to sounds I'd forgotten existed. Movement in the front room. The clink of metal on metal. The smell of coffee brewing. For one confused, half-asleep moment, I thought Jacob was home. Then I remembered everything. The boy. The storm. The strangers in my spare room. I dressed quickly and emerged to find David crouched by my fire, feeding it fresh logs. The coffee pot sat on the stove, already steaming. "Morning." He looked up, almost guilty. "Hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make myself useful." He'd meant well. I knew he'd meant well. That knowledge did nothing to ease the territorial irritation rising in my chest. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. Wanted to." He stood, brushing bark from his hands. Least I could do after I know. You're grateful. You've said. I moved past him to check the coffee, needing something to do with my hands. Storm hasn't let up. No. He glanced at the window. Might be another day before we can leave. Another day. The words should have felt like a burden. They didn't. That worried me more than anything. Thomas appeared, sleep-tousled and smiling. Morning, Miss Martha. Morning, Thomas. How are you feeling? Good Papa said the storm's still going. Does that mean we get to stay? The hope in his voice was naked, uncomplicated. I envied children their ability to want things openly. Looks that way. Can I help you make breakfast? Papa lets me crack eggs sometimes. I started to refuse. Stopped. All right, but carefully. We made breakfast together, all three of us, in my small kitchen, passing ingredients and utensils, working around each other in that careful dance of new proximity. Thomas cracked 4 eggs, only broke the shells into the bowl once. David sliced ham with the same precise care he'd shown with the bread. I fried everything and tried to pretend this felt normal. It didn't feel normal. It felt like something else entirely. Something I didn't have words for. After breakfast, David insisted on splitting more firewood. I let him. Told myself it was practical. Watched him through the window as he worked the swing of the axe. The economical movement. The way he paused sometimes to wipe his face with his sleeve. I'd watched Jacob the same way once. The memory came unwanted and I pushed it away. Thomas stayed inside with me, drawing pictures at the table with paper and a pencil I found in my sewing basket. He hummed while he worked, some song I didn't recognize. The sound-filled spaces I'd forgotten needed filling. What are you drawing? He held it up. Our house. See, that's Papa and me, and that's you. 3 stick figures, a door with a wreath, windows with curtains. That's very nice. Do you like Christmas, Miss Martha? I used to. Why don't you now, children and their questions? Simple as knives, cutting right to the truth. I've been alone for Christmas the last few years. Gets harder to enjoy things alone. You're not alone now. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like 3 people in a cabin during a blizzard was all it took to not be alone anymore. Maybe for him it was that simple. David came in stomping snow from his boots, bringing cold air and the smell of winter with him. Wood stacked. Should last through tomorrow at least. Thank you. You didn't have to. Seems I do a lot of things I don't have to. His smile was slight. Tired. Guess I'm not good at sitting still. Neither am I. I noticed. We looked at each other across my small cabin. Something passed between us. Recognition. Maybe fellow travelers who'd learned the same roads. I turned away first. I should start on dinner. I'll help. You don't, I know, but I'm going to anyway. So we cooked together, peeling potatoes, cutting carrots, working in companionable near silence. He moved competently, like someone used to feeding himself and a child. I found myself noticing things I had no business noticing. The way he tested the broth with a careful sip. How he made Thomas laugh by pretending to drop the spoon. The gentleness in every gesture toward his son. By evening, Thomas had drawn 6 more pictures. David had repaired 3 things I hadn't asked him to the loose shutter. The sticky door latch, the wobbly table leg. I'd made enough food to feed 6 people and tried to pretend I didn't know why. We ate dinner together again. 3 plates, 3 chairs, 3 people. The table didn't seem overcrowded anymore. After Thomas went to bed, David and I sat by the fire with coffee. Real silence this time. Not awkward, just present. I'd set out 2 coffee cups before realizing what I'd done. Old habits from a marriage I'd thought I'd forgotten. Muscle memory that apparently ran deeper than conscious thought. David held his cup in both hands, staring into the fire. I knitted, counting stitches, trying not to count the ways my cabin felt different with him in it. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way he made his son laugh. How he said, "Thank you," like he meant it. Like small kindnesses were rare enough to treasure. The quiet competence in everything he did. 3 years I'd told myself I didn't need this, the sound of a man's boots in my home. A child's laughter. The fullness of ordinary life. 3 years of lying. "Thank you for today," David said quietly. "For letting us stay. For being so kind to Thomas. He's an easy child to be kind to. Still, not everyone would have..." He trailed off. "You've been very generous. It's just a storm. Just circumstances. Maybe. But you're choosing to be gracious about it. That's not..." Nothing. I didn't know what to say to that. Kept knitting instead. Thomas called out from the bedroom. David rose immediately. Bad dream. Probably. He gets them sometimes, since his mother... He stopped. "I'll go check on him." He left me alone with my knitting and my thoughts. Both kept tangling. When he returned, he paused in the doorway. "He's asking for you. Actually, wants to show you his drawing." I set down my needles and followed. Thomas sat up in bed, holding out a new picture. "Look, Miss Martha, I drew our Christmas. The house again. 3 people. But this time there was a Christmas tree. Presents. A star on top. It's beautiful. Will you keep it?" Something in my chest cracked. "Of course I will." Thomas smiled, settled back into his pillow. "Good. Merry Christmas. Miss Martha, Merry Christmas." "Thomas." David walked me back to the front room. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, I broke the silence. "He's a sweet boy. He is. Gets it from his mother." David's voice went soft. "She would have liked you." I didn't know how to respond to that either. I went to bed shortly after, lay awake listening to the storm still raging outside. Inside, everything was quiet, peaceful. I traced the figures in my mind Thomas's drawing. 3 people in a house. When had I started noticing the sound of David's footsteps? When had they become familiar instead of intrusive? When had I started missing them? When he wasn't moving around, I fell asleep, still wondering. The second evening, Thomas went to bed early again. Worn out from a day of playing and drawing and asking endless questions, David and I settled by the fire with coffee like it was already routine. The silence lasted longer this time before he spoke. "How long have you been alone?" The question came gentle, curious without being intrusive. I could have deflected. Should have. Probably. But something in his voice made me answer honestly. 3 years. Since my husband died. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't know him." "Still." He stared into his coffee. "It's hard. Being alone?" "Yes." The simple truth of it sat between us. "It is." We didn't speak for a while. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the shutters. I counted stitches and tried to decide if I wanted to tell him more. The wanting decided me. We met young. I heard myself say, married fast, had 7 good years before he got sick. The words came easier than expected. Winter like this one. Nothing the doctor could do. I sat beside him and felt helpless for 3 months, watching him fade. My voice stayed steady. I'd learned to talk about Jacob without breaking, at least on the surface. Below was different, but no one needed to see that. Afterward, I tried to keep the ranch going, but it was too much alone. Sold half to a neighbor, then the other half ended up here. I gestured around the small cabin. Told myself it was practical, less to maintain, more manageable. And was it? I paused my knitting. It was quieter. That's not the same thing. David nodded slowly. No, it's not. What about you? He took a breath. My wife died, giving birth to Thomas. 5 years ago now. His hands tightened on his cup. I held her while she bled out. Couldn't stop it. Nothing anyone could do. She got to hold him once. Then she was gone. The rawness in his voice made my chest hurt. Thomas doesn't remember her. I tell him stories, show him her picture. But she's just an idea to him, not a person. He set down his cup. Sometimes I think that's easier. He doesn't miss what he never really had. I miss her every single day. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't know her. I almost smiled at hearing my own words back. Still, we sat in shared silence that felt different now, waited with mutual understanding, fellow survivors of the same particular storm, speaking a language only other widows and widowers truly knew. It's exhausting, David said quietly, being strong every day, making every decision alone, having no one to check with, to share the worry with. Just you and your thoughts and the constant effort of managing. When he told me about his wife, I heard something in his voice. I recognized that particular kind of tired that comes from holding yourself, together with nothing but will and habit. Yes, I met his eyes. That's exactly what it is. People tell you it gets easier. It doesn't. You just get more used to carrying it. Yes. His voice held relief. Thank you for understanding that. We weren't falling in love. Not yet. We were just two people who'd survived the same storm, remembering what it felt like not to be the only one. Who understood? Do you ever think about... He trailed off. Sorry. None of my business. About what? Trying again? Finding someone? Building something new? I considered the question. Sometimes. Then I remember what it costs to lose someone, and I think maybe it's better to just stay safe. Yes, I do the same thing. He leaned back in his chair. Tell myself I'm content alone, that Thomas is enough, that I don't need more than what I have. But then I wake up at 3 a.m. and the house is too quiet, and I wonder if I'm lying to myself. The honesty in his words unlocked something in me. I've gotten good at lying to myself, telling myself the silence is peace, not loneliness. That one plate is simplicity, not sadness. That I chose this instead of it just happening because I was too afraid to choose anything else. Afraid of what? Loving again, losing again, going through it all over the building and the breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that twice. David was quiet for a long moment. I think about that too. Then I think maybe being alone until we die isn't strength either. Maybe it's just giving up. I set down my knitting, looked at him fully. Is this you giving up? I don't know what this is. His eyes held mine. But it doesn't feel like giving up. Neither did it. That's what terrified me. I stood abruptly. It's late. I should... Martha. He stood too. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't. I struggled for words. This is a lot. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You haven't done anything wrong. I wrapped my arms around myself. It's just been a long time since I talked to someone who understood. Too long for both of us. I think we stood there in the firelight, not touching, not moving closer, just existing in the strange intimacy of shared grief and recognition. Good night, David. Good night, Martha. I went to my room but didn't sleep for hours. Lay there replaying the conversation, the look in his eyes, the way my heart had cracked open when he described his exhaustion, because I knew it, lived it, carried it like a second skeleton. I'd spent 3 years building walls. Now this man and his son had walked through them like they'd never existed. And I was terrified. Terrified of wanting this, terrified of losing it. Terrified I'd already let them in too far to protect myself when they left. Not if. I had to remember that. They would leave. The storm would end. They would go back to their lives, and I would go back to mine, and all of this, the conversations, the shared meals. The feeling of not being alone would become just another memory to carry. But lying there in the dark, I realized the damage was already done. I'd cracked open. Let him see the wounds I'd spent 3 years hiding. And the terrifying part wasn't that I'd shown him. It was that it felt like relief. I woke on the 3rd morning to Thomas coughing. It wasn't the casual clearing of a throat. It was deeper, rougher, the kind of cough that meant trouble. I found David already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in the spare room with his hand on his son's forehead. He's burning up. I crossed to the bed, felt for myself. Thomas's skin was hot, too hot. His breathing came shallow and fast, probably from his exposure to the cold. I kept my voice calm, practical. We need to get the fever down. David's face had gone pale. What do you need? Cool water, clean cloths, and willow bark if you can find it. There's some in the tin on the top shelf in the kitchen. He moved immediately. I sat beside Thomas, smoothed his damp hair back from his forehead. His eyes fluttered open. Miss Martha, I'm here. Sweetheart, you're going to be fine. Just a fever. I'm cold. I know, but we need to cool you down, not warm you up. Trust me, he nodded. Too sick to argue. David returned with everything. I soaked the cloths in cool water and laid them on Thomas's forehead, wrists, and neck. Made willow bark tea and coaxed small sips past his lips. Spoken low, steady tones about nothing and everything, just keeping him calm, keeping him focused on my voice. David hovered, trying to help, mostly just getting in the way. I could see the panic barely contained behind his careful movements. Why don't you get some rest? I suggested gently. I'll watch him. I can't sleep. Then sit. But hovering won't help him. He settled into the chair by the bed, hands gripping the arms like anchors. I worked through the morning changing cloths, checking temperature, administering tea, watching Thomas's labored breathing. Around noon, David finally dozed in his chair, exhausted by fear and the previous days of tension. I watched him sleep, the lines of worry still visible on his face, the way his hand rested on Thomas's blanket, even unconscious. This man had already lost his wife. The thought of him losing his son, too, made something fierce rise in my chest. Protective, determined. I wouldn't let that happen. I sat vigil through the afternoon and into evening, monitoring every breath, every degree of temperature, every small change. David woke periodically. We'd exchange quiet words, then he'd drift off again. The exhaustion of 3 days had caught up with him. Near midnight, Thomas's fever finally broke. His breathing eased, color returned to his cheeks. He fell into genuine sleep instead of fevered restlessness. I sat back in relief so profound it made my hands shake. David woke, immediately alert. "How is he?" "Fever broke. He'll be fine now." David's face crumpled. He covered it with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Relief. Terror draining away, the weight of almost loss hitting all at once. I looked away, gave him privacy for his breaking. When he'd composed himself, he wiped his eyes and looked at me. "Thank you. Again. I seem to only ever say thank you to you. You don't need to thank me for caring whether a child lives or dies." Still, his voice was rough. "I don't know what I would have done without you here. If we'd been alone somewhere and this happened, don't think about that. You weren't alone. He's going to be fine." We sat in the quiet of the sick room, Thomas sleeping peacefully between us. The intimacy of shared crisis, of trusting each other in fear, of caring for what mattered most to the other person. "You're good at this," David said. "Taking care of people." I had practice. Jacob was sick a long time. "It's more than that. You're just good at it. Natural." I didn't know what to say. Busied myself checking Thomas's temperature again. Still normal, still sleeping. "The storm's clearing," David observed, nodding toward the window. I looked. He was right. The wind had died. Snow had stopped. Through the clouds, I could see stars. "Roads will be passable by tomorrow afternoon. Probably. We both knew what that meant. Time was running out. Soon they'd leave. Soon this strange interlude would end. I stood. "You should get real sleep, in a proper bed. I'll watch him. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. Go sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. Too tired to fight. "Thank you, Martha." He left. I settled into the chair he'd vacated, pulled a quilt over my knees, and watched Thomas sleep. I'd forgotten what it felt like to care whether someone else survived the night, to have my own sleep depend on another person's breathing. I'd buried that capacity with Jacob, thought it was gone for good. But sitting there in the gray pre-dawn light, watching this child I'd known for 3 days sleep peacefully, I understood I was in terrible danger. Not from them, from myself. From wanting this. From the way my heart had opened, whether I'd given it permission or not. The storm outside had cleared. The one inside me was just beginning. Thomas improved through the day. By evening, he was sitting up, asking for food, complaining about being bored. David looked years younger without the weight of fear on his shoulders. The roads were clear, passable, safe for travel. They should leave. We all knew it. No one said it aloud. Dinner was quiet, weighted with unspoken things. Thomas chattered about wanting to go home, see his toys, sleep in his own bed. David and I made appropriate noises, avoided looking at each other directly. After Thomas was settled for the night, one more night, just to be safe. We'd agreed David and I sat by the fire. The silence felt different, heavy. "We'll leave tomorrow morning," he said finally. "Imposed on you long enough?" "It hasn't been an imposition." "Still, you've been more than generous. Time we got out of your hair." I nodded, hands tight on my knitting. "If you think that's best." We lapsed into silence again. The fire popped. The clock ticked. Everything felt too loud and too quiet at once. "Thomas will miss you," David said. "He's gotten attached." "I'll miss him too." "Just him." I looked up. David was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What are you asking?" "I don't know." He set down his coffee. Maybe if you'll miss just Thomas, or if there might be something else you'll miss. My heart hammered. David, I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't. He stood, paced to the window. It's just these last few days, being here, talking to you, I haven't felt this, not alone in 5 years. I know what you mean. Do you? He turned to face me. Because I keep thinking maybe I'm imagining it. Making something out of nothing. Because I'm desperate not to go back to that empty house and that quiet and the exhaustion of doing it all alone. I set down my knitting with shaking hands. You're not imagining it. So you feel it too. Yes? The admission cost me, and it terrifies me. Why, because I can't do this again. I stood. Needed to move. Can't build something and then watch it break. Can't survive losing someone else. I stopped. Couldn't say the word. I'm not strong enough. Martha, I've spent 3 years building walls, making myself safe, learning not to need anyone. And then you and Thomas showed up and tore through all of it like it was nothing. My voice shook. Do you know how much that scares me? Yes, because I feel exactly the same. We stood across the room from each other, too far apart and too close at once. I'm afraid of losing again, I whispered, afraid of the grief, the emptiness, going through it all over. I know. Me too. Then you understand why I can't. I do. He took a step closer. But I also think maybe being alone until we die isn't the answer either. Maybe it's just giving up. Is there a difference between giving up and protecting yourself? I don't know. I used to think there wasn't. Now, he gestured between us. Now I'm not so sure. I wrapped my arms around myself. What are you asking me? I don't know. Maybe just... Could we try not marriage, not big promises, just... Could we see each other sometimes? Could I visit? Could we not throw away whatever this is, just because we're scared? The offer hung in the air. Simple, terrifying. Everything I wanted and feared. I should say no, should protect myself. Should send them away tomorrow and lock my door and rebuild my walls and learn to live with one plate again. I opened my mouth to say exactly that. I need to think. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no either. David heard the difference, nodded. Take your time. I'm not trying to pressure you. Just wanted you to know that it's not just me, that if you wanted to try, I'd be willing to risk it too. He went to bed shortly after, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the dying fire. I didn't sleep that night. Lay awake listing all the reasons to say no. The risk, the fear, the certainty that loving again meant setting myself up for grief again. The knowledge that I'd barely survived losing Jacob. How could I possibly survive losing someone else? But then I thought about the alternative. Going back to my empty cabin, one plate, one chair. The silence I'd convinced myself was peace. Living the next 20 or 30 years alone, safe, protected, and completely isolated from the possibility of joy. Was that survival? Or was it just a slower kind of dying? I almost got up. Almost walked to the Johnsons' farm 3 miles away. Anywhere to escape the feeling of choice pressing down on me. But then Thomas coughed in his sleep, and I was checking on him before I consciously decided to move. Found David awake, sitting beside his son's bed. Just a normal cough, I said quietly. He's fine. I know, I just He shrugged. Needed to check. I understood that. The compulsion to make sure the people you love were still breathing. We stood there in the darkness. Not touching, just present. I'm scared too, David said suddenly. If that matters. What? You said you're scared? So am I. Terrified. Actually, of losing again. Of not being enough. Of trying and failing. Of being alone and of not being alone. Take your pick. Then why are you asking me to try? Because I'm more scared of the alternative. Of spending the rest of my life wondering, what if? Of teaching Thomas that it's better to be safe and alone than to risk being hurt. He looked at me in the dim light. When he's grown, if he finds someone who makes him feel less alone. I want him to be brave enough to try. How can I teach him that if I'm not willing to try myself, the simplicity of it broke something in me? I don't know if I can be that brave. You already are. You opened your door to a dying child in a blizzard. You took in strangers. You sat up all night with a fever you could have walked away from. You're one of the bravest people I've met. That's different. That's just caring about people, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when you could get hurt. He smiled slightly. Sounds like love to me. I didn't have an answer for that. We went back to our separate rooms. I lay awake watching dawn creep across my ceiling. Fear of losing again. Fear of not having this. Fear of wanting something so much it could destroy me. Take your pick. I had all three warring inside me and no idea which would win. But when he'd said he was scared too, something had shifted. Not decided. Not yet. But the question had changed. Not, could I survive losing again? But could I survive never trying? I still didn't have an answer. But at least now I was asking the right question. Morning came clear and bright. The storm had passed completely, leaving everything covered in fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Beautiful and terrible at once. Beautiful because it meant the world had survived. Terrible because it meant they could leave. I made breakfast mechanically. David packed their things. Thomas chattered about going home, oblivious to the tension between the adults, or maybe just choosing to ignore it the way children do when grown-up feelings get too complicated. After breakfast, David loaded the wagon. Thomas bundled into his coat. Time was running out. I stood in my doorway watching them prepare. The yard looked exactly as it had 4 days ago, just buried deeper in snow. Everything was the same. Nothing was the same. I could let this happen. Watch them drive away, close my door. Return to my one plate, my careful silence, my safe little life. Part of me wanted to. That part that had learned survival meant not needing anyone, not depending on anything but yourself. But there was another part now, a part that had woken up during these 4 days. A part that remembered what it felt like to set 3 plates instead of 1, to hear voices in the morning, to care about someone's breathing in the night. David checked the harness one more time, lifted Thomas into the wagon, turned to face me. This was it. The moment of choosing, Thomas spoke first. Will you visit? Miss Martha. His voice held that naked hope children haven't learned to hide yet. Please, Papa said we live in town. You could come for Sunday supper. I looked at this boy who'd stumbled into my life during a blizzard, who'd drawn me pictures and asked endless questions and called me when he had nightmares, who'd cracked my heart open just by existing. Then I looked at his father. David's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes held everything hope, fear, understanding, an invitation with no pressure, a door left open whether I walked through it or not. The words I'd prepared, the gentle refusal, the kind dismissal, the careful rebuilding of my walls sat on my tongue, ready to be spoken. I thought about my empty cabin, my silent meals, my nights of proving I could manage alone. 3 years of managing. 3 years of surviving. 3 years of calling loneliness peace because it was safer than the alternative. Then I thought about Thomas's drawing. 3 people in a house. The life I could have if I was brave enough to risk it. My mouth opened. The refusal waited. What came out was yes. Just that. Simple, irrevocable, terrifying. Yes, I said again. Stronger. I'd like that, Thomas cheered. Actually cheered, bouncing in the wagon seat. Did you hear that? Papa, she said yes. David's face transformed. Relief and joy washing over him like sunrise. You're sure? No. But I'm saying yes anyway. He smiled, really smiled, and something in my chest loosened. Sunday then, around noon. Sunday. We stood there looking at each other across the snowy yard. So much unsaid. So much uncertain. But something decided too. David climbed into the wagon. Thank you, Martha, for everything. You already thanked me. I know. But I mean all of it. The rescue, the care, the everything. I nodded, not trusting my voice. They drove away slowly, the wagon tracks cutting fresh lines through the snow. Thomas waved from the back until they disappeared around the bend. I stood there long after they'd gone, listening to the silence settle back in. Then I went inside. The cabin felt wrong, too empty, too quiet. The spare room door stood open, bed made, everything exactly as it had been 4 days ago. The table still had 3 chairs pulled up. I looked at them for a long moment, then pushed 2 back to the corner. 1 chair, 1 plate, the way it had been. But I couldn't make myself put away the second coffee cup I'd set out that morning from habit. Left it sitting on the counter, a small rebellion against returning to the way things were. I sat in my rocking chair and picked up my knitting, counted stitches, tried to settle back into routine. It didn't fit anymore. Like wearing clothes that had shrunk, uncomfortable, constraining. 4 days. That's all it had taken to unravel 3 years of careful construction. 4 days of voices and presence and the feeling of not being alone. I'd said yes. The word echoed in my mind. Yes to Sunday supper. But it meant more than that. Yes to trying. Yes to risking. Yes to the possibility of building something and maybe watching it break, but trying anyway. Because the alternative, this hollow safety, had stopped being enough. The thought terrified me. Still did. Would probably terrify me every day. But sitting there in my too quiet cabin, I realized David had been right. I was more afraid of the alternative, of spending the rest of my life wondering what if, of dying alone and safe, having never really lived at all. I didn't know then that Sunday suppers would become twice-weekly visits. That Thomas would start calling me Aunt Martha, and then, later, something softer. That David would court me slowly, respectfully. Like I was something precious, worth the patience. That 6 months later, he'd ask, and I'd say yes again. Bigger this time. A wedding yes. An irrevocable yes. A yes that meant building a life instead of just surviving one. I didn't know any of that sitting in my cabin that afternoon. All I knew was I'd chosen risk over safety. Chosen living over existing. Chosen him and Thomas and the terrifying possibility of loss because the alternative had become unbearable. 1 yes, 1 choice. 1 word that changed everything. People would ask me later how I knew David was right for me. I'd tell them I didn't. I just knew I was tired of being right, all alone. The truth was simpler and harder than that. I'd spent 3 years protecting my heart, forgot that hearts were meant to be used. Forgot that a heart that never risks, never breaks, but it never beats for anything either. Just ticks along like a clock, marking time, waiting to stop. I wanted more than that, deserved more than that. So I'd said yes to Sunday supper and whatever came after. To the possibility of joy and the certainty of fear and the gamble that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth the risk. I pulled Thomas's drawing from where I'd tucked it into my sewing basket. 3 stick figures. A house. A family. I propped it on the mantel where I could see it. A reminder, a promise, a hope. Sunday was 4 days away. I'd count everyone. Christmas Eve, 1 year later, I stood in David's kitchen, our kitchen, watching snow fall through the window. Different snow, different kitchen, different life. But some things stayed the same. The quiet anticipation, the smell of pine and cinnamon, the weight of memory mixed with hope. Thomas sat at the table cutting paper snowflakes, his tongue poking out in concentration. He'd grown taller this year, lost a tooth. Started calling me Mama 3 months ago like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was. David moved behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders. I leaned back against him without thinking. The ease of it still surprised me sometimes. How natural it had become to accept comfort, to offer it, to exist in the space between two people instead of locked inside my own walls. "You all right?" he murmured against my hair. "Just thinking about last year, the storm, how different everything is now." His hands tightened slightly. "Better different." "Yes." I turned to face him. "Terrifying different, but better." He smiled and pressed a kiss to my forehead. The baby kicked strong, insistent. I pressed a hand to my belly and felt David's hand join mine. 42 years old and pregnant. The doctor had said it was possible, but unlikely. God apparently had a sense of humor about these things. "How are you feeling?" David asked for the 10th time that day. "The same as I felt an hour ago. Tired, happy, anxious. Take your pick. All of the above. All of the above." Thomas bounced over. Snowflakes forgotten. "Tell me the story again." "Mama, about the blizzard." I'd told him a dozen times, but he never tired of it. The story of how we'd found each other. His story and mine and David's all tangled together. Again, I smiled. "Don't you know it by heart already? But I like how you tell it." So I told him about the Christmas Eve storm, about hearing crying through the wind, about opening my door not knowing it would change everything, about his fever and his father's fear, and the way 3 people at a table could feel like family. Thomas listened with the satisfaction of a child hearing his own origin story. When I finished, he wrapped his arms around my waist, or tried to, belly in the way now. "You saved my life that night," he said. It was part of the story. His line. The thing he always said. "And you saved mine." Sweet boy. He grinned and ran back to his snowflakes. David pulled me close again. "And do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your cabin, your independence, the quiet." I considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss the simplicity. Everything being predictable, safe. But I was dying there, slowly. Didn't even realize it until I had something to compare it to. I looked up at him. I was surviving. That's not the same as living. No, it's not. We'd gotten married last Christmas. Small ceremony in the church. Thomas between us, grinning so wide I thought his face would split. I'd worn my best dress and carried winter roses. David had cried through his vows. I'd held his hands and promised to try, to stay, to risk my heart again, because his was worth the gamble. I'd brought Jacob's picture to this house. David understood. Made space for it on the mantel next to his wife's. Our lost loves watching over our found one. It felt right, honest. Like we were building something new that honored what came before, instead of pretending it didn't exist. The baby kicked again. David felt it. Smiled that wondering smile he got whenever it happened. We'd spent months terrified something would go wrong, that I'd lose this baby like I'd lost everything else, that God would take this too. But the doctor said I was healthy. The baby was strong. Everything was progressing well. I was learning slowly, carefully to hope again, to believe good things could happen and stay, that not everything I loved would be taken from me. "What are you thinking?" David asked. "That I'm grateful, scared, but grateful." Scared of what? Everything. Childbirth at my age, being a mother, not being good enough, losing this. I gestured around the warm kitchen. At Thomas, at our life. It still terrifies me sometimes how much I have to lose now. Me too. But you still think it's worth it. Every day, he kissed my temple. Every single day. People asked me how I knew David was right for me. I told them I didn't. I just knew I was tired of being right all alone. But the real answer was harder to explain. I'd learned that love the second time wasn't less because you'd loved before. It was deeper because you knew what it cost, what it was worth, what it meant to choose it anyway. I'd learned that bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was saying yes while your hands shook. It was opening your door during a storm. It was setting 3 plates instead of 1 and meaning it. I'd learned that surviving alone was possible, but not sufficient. That hearts were meant to be used, risked, broken and mended and risked again. That a life spent protected was a life half lived. The snow kept falling outside. Inside, Thomas sang a Christmas carol slightly off key. David moved around the kitchen preparing supper. The baby kicked against my ribs like a promise. This time last year, I'd sat in my empty cabin counting stitches and calling loneliness peace. I'd thought my life was written and finished. Turned out I was just done with the prologue. "Tell me again," Thomas said, appearing at my elbow. "The part where you decided to let us stay. You were sick and the storm hadn't stopped. It wasn't much of a decision. But you chose us." His 7-year-old logic was absolute. You could have made us leave. But you chose us instead. Out of the mouths of babes. Yes. I agreed. I chose you. And kept choosing. Every Sunday supper, every twice-weekly visit. Every time David asked, "Are you sure?" and I said yes. Every day I woke up in this house instead of my safe. Small cabin and felt grateful instead of trapped. Choosing was a muscle. Got stronger the more you used it. "Supper's ready," David called. We gathered around the table, 3 chairs now, soon to need a 4th. Thomas said grace, his small voice serious. We passed dishes and talked about our day and made plans for tomorrow. Ordinary. Simple. Everything I'd thought I didn't need. Everything I'd been dying without. After supper. After Thomas was in bed. David and I sat by the fire. His hand rested on my belly. Feeling the baby move. We didn't talk. Didn't need to. just existed together in the peaceful quiet of a life we'd built from a storm. Sometimes you survive alone until you don't have to anymore. Sometimes a blizzard brings exactly what you need. Sometimes rescue runs both directions. Sometimes if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to say yes. And sometimes, yes is enough. I'd opened my door to a crying child in a storm and found my way back to life. One yes, one choice, one word that meant everything. I looked at David, at the fire, at the snow falling outside, pressed my hand over his on my belly, and felt our child move beneath our joined palms. I'd spent so long protecting my heart. I'd forgotten hearts were meant to be used. I was using mine now, fully, completely, without reservation. It terrified me still. Probably always would. But I wouldn't change a single thing.